Okay, so since voice tweets have been removed, this is what we're doing. And so the first doctrine that we'll be talking about is that man is bound to inquire into a positive religion that with the appearance of truth presents itself as manifested by God and prescribed for him. So in other words, if a man suspects a religion to be true, if he perceives hints of its veracity, there is an obligation for him to inquire into that religion. Okay, the reasons for this are firstly, man is naturally dependent upon God as his creator and Lord. And so, lest he detract from God's veracity and authority, he must inquire into the religion which appears probable. Otherwise, he is showing a practical indifference to God. He's practically ignoring God. Secondly, is that a subject of the law is bound to inquire with a proportionate diligence into the existence of a probable law. Otherwise, the law becomes practically ineffective and useless. And there is no law higher than that pertaining to the last sin of man. And so, if a religion appears to be true, we are bound to investigate into it, and indeed with the highest degree of diligence. We must inquire into it absolutely, given the gravity of this law. And thirdly, is that this is confirmed in man's naturally being a religious animal. And this is confirmed in his ubiquitous practice of religion, his desire to probe into things pertaining to the divine, his mind and will tending towards God as the supreme truth and the supreme good, in whom alone he will find perfect happiness and satisfaction and fulfillment. And so, lest he fail to attain to his last end, which is again union with God, he must inquire into the probable religion and subsequently convert whence certitude of its veracity is achieved. And then a few questions are asked. Firstly is whether probabilism can be utilized with regard to this law. So probabilism is a moral system which states that if theoretical certitude of a law cannot be achieved, then we can at least have practical certainty as to how we may act in the situation, because we can fall back on the reflex principle, lexum dubia non obligat, a doubtful law does not oblige. So, for example, you're presented with a certain meal on a day of abstinence, and you're not sure whether it qualifies as meat or not, and it's impossible for you to do research into this at the moment, so you can't achieve theoretical certainty, but you can at least have practical certainty as to whether you may eat the meal or not, because you can fall back on the reflex principle that a doubtful law does not oblige, and so you're free to eat the meal in this situation. But there are exceptions to the application of the reflex principles. In other words, there are exceptions to the application of probabilism, namely when the law is so important and essential and absolutely necessary that we have to achieve theoretical certainty. So, for example, when a man's life is in question, so you're not allowed to play Russian roulette. You're not allowed to shoot into a bush because it's probably an animal and not a man. And you're not allowed to use doubtful matter in administering a sacrament, right? You can't use doubtful matter when administering baptism. You must use water because baptism is absolutely necessary for salvation. So when it comes to inquiring into the probable religion, we must investigate into it and achieve a theoretical certainty of its being true, if it is, lest we fail to achieve our last end. There's nothing more important than man achieving his last end, which is union with God. That's the purpose for which he exists. But secondly, we must say that a different standard is applied to Catholics than to non-Catholics. So let's presume that Catholicism is true for the moment, for the sake of argument. If Catholicism is true, then it would be illicit to inquire. It would be illicit for a Catholic to inquire into other religions as if they could be true. Because he has, unlike those in false religions, he has an objective certainty of Catholicism being true, and the grace of God also confirms him in the true religion. Whereas for those in false religions, they do not have an objective certainty, and the grace of God does not confirm them in their false religions, but rather draws them away. God is trying to draw them to the Catholic Church. And so, obviously, a different standard is going to be applied to Catholics than to non-Catholics.